Okay, Mark, you've called the press today. First of all, what do you want to say to us?
I think I just want to make clear at the moment that the steam packet company is facing a situation which is a serious one for the company and for its employees and ultimately for the Isle of Man. And it's a situation which has not been brought about in any way by the actions of the steam packet. We've lived up to our obligations under the user agreement with the Isle of Man government over a long period of time now, and we're facing a situation where potentially we're still obliged to meet all of the requirements of the user agreement in terms of the provision of passenger services, but we're not getting the protections from government under the user agreement that we're entitled to.
So what have you been saying to, first of all, your staff? You had meetings with them the other day.
Well, the staff are understandably concerned about the situation, so we felt it was important to spell out to staff exactly what the situation is at the moment and what the potential long-term repercussions are. Now, we have obviously had questions about things like redundancies and staff changes and so on, and while we can't rule those out in the longer term, that's not in the frame at the moment, and we're very much concentrating on the short-term actions we can take to remedy the situation and restore a normal level of service.
There's loads there to go at. I mean, first of all, what are those things that you can do to restore things to what you would like them to be?
Well, clearly in simple terms, we'd like to win back some of the freight customers. They're perhaps the first step, and that's something which we're actively trying to do to encourage some of those customers who may already have decided to move or have already moved to come back to us, because we believe we offer a better quality service. We believe we can offer a very good value service to those people and a very reliable service. Indeed, we've done that over many years, and we're quite clear, despite many of the issues that may have been discussed around the place, that the reality of these moves is based on price, not on any other aspect of the service we offer.
Well, clearly, therefore, they're getting a better deal, aren't they?
Well, they may well be getting a better deal for themselves, but I think what's important to understand here is that they're doing that at the long-term expense of Manx travellers and Manx residents, because the user agreement we have with the government makes it very clear that we use the higher freight revenues to subsidise lower passenger fares. And if that weren't the case, then in many other island communities there is simply a subsidy given directly by government to the operator. We don't have that here. The government have done a very good deal with the steam packet company back in the mid-1990s, which obliged us to provide a range of services and did so without any requirement from government to provide subsidies.
So what do you do? Lower the price?
Well, there are lots of short-term options. I mean, the simple options for us are to stay within the user agreement and do things like lowering service frequency, increasing price of certain types of traffic in order to compensate for the loss of revenue that we're now suffering from freight traffic. That obviously isn't an ideal long-term solution for us, but it is perhaps one of our short-term response options.
But you mentioned that the user agreement, you could break it then, could you?
Well, the user agreement is not working as it should, but we still see there is a value in the user agreement, and it's not our current intention to break it, and we don't think that would be in the long-term interest of either the company or of the Isle of Man.
But you could break it if you wanted to? How does it work?
Well, it's not as simple as that. The user agreement is a long-term agreement which has many different facets to it, so I don't think that it's something we would take lightly in terms of could we break it, should we break it. I think what's more important is that the intent of the agreement was to provide protection for passenger services over the longer period, and clearly that isn't now working, so that needs attention both by us and by government.
Okay, you've had meetings with government. What have they had to say for themselves?
Well, it's early days yet. We have had meetings, and obviously we've made them aware of our concerns, and they've made us aware of some of the issues they have to deal with. I think what we're all united on is the fact that we recognise this is a serious threat to passenger services on the Isle of Man, and that we need to work together to resolve it, and that needs to happen quickly.
I mean, at the end of the day, you've got a business to run, you've got profits to make, and clearly the model's been broken, hasn't it?
Well, it's not the model that's been broken. I think the reality is that there is a subsidy necessary. All small island communities like this cannot operate on the high frequency and quality of service that we have without some form of subsidy. Now, that subsidy can come in many different forms. It just so happens here that it comes in the form of higher freight prices and protection from freight competition, as at least that's historically been the case. Now, it may well be that government decide that they're quite happy with freight competition going forward, and that they would prefer to help passenger services by way of a direct subsidy. They're all possibilities, but they're options on the table, but they're certainly not options that decisions have been taken upon yet.
Now, you mentioned the possibility of redundancies. Where are you going to go with that?
Well, nowhere in the short term, because we don't want to even raise the spectre of redundancies more than we have to. I think what we have to recognise ultimately, though, is that if the company is not able to secure those freight revenues and is still obliged to provide the full range and frequency of passenger services that we do at present, then clearly that's not an equation that's going to hold together for very long. The natural consequence of that is that there will have to be reductions and cuts in services, and it follows that if that is the case, that we will simply not need the same number of employees to provide those services.
Okay, I mean that's making it quite clear that the possibility there is going to be cutbacks if you don't get this situation sorted to your satisfaction.
Well, it's not just to our satisfaction. I think it's to the satisfaction of the island. I mean, let's be clear here. We're not about wanting to cut Isle of Man employees or to cut services. We don't think that's in the best interest of the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man has grown in recent years in part because of the level of services that we offer and the reliable connectivity which is absolutely vital to an island community. So, anyone who thinks differently that this would be a positive step, I think frankly is deluding themselves. What is important is that we shouldn't allow our range of services to be undermined by freight competition which does not bring anything or add anything to the island in general, and we believe that that's firmly the case in the situation we're suffering at present.
Okay, what wriggle room have you got under the present situation then, as it stands at the moment?
In terms of wriggle room, if we're talking about staying within the user agreement, then there's quite a few things we can do in terms of service frequency, in terms of destinations that we serve, the amount of capacity that we put onto those routes, and those are things we will look closely at now. We happen to be in the time of year when we would ordinarily look at our schedules for next year, so in that sense the timing is perhaps not as bad as it might otherwise be, but we are clearly now looking very hard at the schedules for next year, what services and indeed what vessels we may operate.
Were you surprised how quickly two of your major clients jumped ship, to use that term?
Yeah, we were surprised because we had been talking certainly to Tesco for a long period of time because we recognised that it was important to keep them as a customer of the steam packets, and we had made several advances to them. We still believe that we can offer a better quality and better value service than they may get ultimately with their present arrangements. So we will continue talking to Tesco to try and encourage them and ask them to stick with the steam packet company as their preferred shipper.
Could it change very quickly? Could they move back to you?
We don't know what contractual arrangements Tesco may have, so potentially I suspect it may happen quickly if indeed it happens at all. But yes, is the short answer.
Well, there's other major clients you've got, of course, that the hauliers, for instance. Are they the ones that are still with you? Are they happy, or are you having to renegotiate even now with them?
No, I have to say a lot of our customers are quite happy with the arrangements we have. We have obviously been flexible over the years in terms of what we allow them, and we've tried to maintain a level playing field so that we're not in any way distorting the market. So that's important that we retain that stance. I think what's important here from the Isle of Man perspective again is to recognise that even if some of our customers do move to a competitor for cheaper rates, that ultimately I suspect is not going to benefit them in terms of lower prices in shops or indeed in any other demonstrable way in the Isle of Man, but it will potentially impact the price and the value and frequency of services that they choose and have on offer as passengers or visitors to the island.
What's the worst scenario that could come out of this?
Well, the worst scenario you have to assume always will be that the steam packet company would not be able to continue functioning as it has. Now that means obviously that is very much a doomsday scenario and one that we don't think will happen, and certainly is not one we would contemplate lightly, but it is a possibility, and I think again we have to recognise that this is a serious issue for the steam packet company.
People with long memories will remember the Manx Line stroke steam packet scenario, which obviously therefore didn't work at that time. Is that what you're anticipating could happen, that both companies effectively drive each other into the ground?
Well, Manx Line and the steam packet scenario was born in a different time, and I think that the parameters of the service were slightly different. I think what's more important here is that, or what's more likely here, I should say, is that the freight competitors are likely to consolidate their service and perhaps don't need the same level of business that historically was the case. So I think that, I suspect that they will be able to operate a profitable business with the customers they have, and perhaps a few more would be icing on the cake, but nevertheless it would be a viable business. Now I can't speak for what longer term aspirations there may be, but clearly we are still protected under the user agreement in terms of passenger services on the link spans. So the service that we're offering at the moment will remain as a fundamentally balanced service between passengers and freight, and the same cannot be said of the service that is being offered by low competitors.
From today, where are you going to go next? What is the next move?
Well, we're working very hard now behind the scenes, talking to all of our partners, both in government and in the private sector, to try and reach a solution that works for all of us. So that's something which will continue to occupy our working days and days to come.
It seems to be moving very fast, the whole thing. I mean, they've just come from nowhere almost, launched their service, then suddenly, you seem to be caught on the back foot. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, I wouldn't say we were caught on the back foot. We were certainly aware that they were there and that they were competing in a more measured way perhaps than had been the case in the past. Obviously, they moved from Ramsey to Douglas and the service has increased in frequency from 3 times weekly to daily. And we always knew that they were a potential threat, and indeed that's why we took action and took steps to try and secure some of our major customers, which unfortunately have not worked to date. But looking forward, we recognise also that this may not be an overnight threat that disappears. We suspect and perhaps expect that it will be here for the longer term, so we need to tailor our services accordingly.
Finally then, this time next year, will the user agreement, do you think, still be in place?
I think it would be very unlikely for anyone to question the actual existence of the user agreement in that regard. So I think the short answer is yes. I think the user agreement has to survive, and I think it has to survive because it's the only thing which will guarantee cost-effective passenger services going forward for the island.